we're ready to start.
Okay. Good morning. We're going to start right now. I'll begin by making a very personal and formal statement, which is I really like the individual who was responsible for arranging the seating on this panel. I'm really well positioned. I won't say any more than that. I'd like to introduce our large panel this morning. I'm going to begin on my extreme right, where we have Mr. Rikin Patel. He is the co-founder and executive director of Avaz.org, and he is working closely with our Global Zero initiative to focus on international political activities. Next to Rikin is Mr. Lawrence Bender, well-known figure, at least, but certainly not only in Hollywood. He is a co-founder of Global Zero, co-founder of a band of Heart Productions, a producer, well-known producer of many well-known movies. But right now, we're focusing on the film Countdown to Zero, which we showed to an audience last night here in Washington, D.C. In fact, I see that David Korn, who was with us this morning, attended that screening. Next to Lawrence is Mr. Jeff Skoll. He is the founder and chairman of Participant Media. They were deeply involved in the production of Countdown to Zero. But Jeff Skoll is, of course, a very successful entrepreneur and supporter of important social activities and movements beyond Global Zero. We have one of our key leaders of Global Zero directly to my right, Her Majesty Queen Noor, who has taken a leadership role and will be speaking briefly on our grassroots activities in our goal of eliminating nuclear weapons worldwide. I'm Richard Burt, former U.S. diplomat, chief negotiator for the START 1 agreement, and the chairman of Global Zero USA. Directly to my left is Ms. Valerie Plame Wilson. She worked as a career CIA operations officer, who plays a very prominent role in the film Countdown to Zero, and is currently affiliated with the Santa Fe Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico. To her left is a retired General Jack Sheehan. He is the former Commander-in-Chief of the United States Atlantic Command, and he's provided military expertise to the Global Zero initiative. And last but certainly not least is the Reverend Richard Cizik, the president of the New Evangelicals and fellow of the Open Society Institute. I will just make one or two brief remarks to open this up and then turn to the other panelists. Global Zero as an initiative is roughly 18 months old. So we got involved in trying to think through the goal of eliminating nuclear weapons worldwide prior to the inauguration of Barack Obama. And at that time, I think we played an important catalytic role in beginning to think through the problems of eliminating all nuclear weapons. And in a large international meeting in Paris over a year ago, we called for a resumption of the U.S.-Russian negotiations to reduce their stockpiles of nuclear weapons, recognizing that with over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, it was incumbent on the United States and the Russian Federation to exercise leadership in this area. We also called in what we called our Global Zero Action Plan for follow-on negotiations, to reduce Russian and American weapons down to 1,000 or so nuclear warheads. We also said that as a next step in the process, we needed to create a multilateral negotiation that would bring other nuclear powers, such as India and China, into the process. In outlining this goal, we made the argument, a very strong public argument, that for the United States and other existing nuclear powers, that nuclear weapons were losing their political and military utility. That the danger of nuclear weapons was no longer the classical Cold War paradigm of a U.S.-Russian nuclear conflict. That the danger of nuclear weapons in the 21st century is the spread of nuclear weapons, not to strong states, not to great powers, but to weaker states, more fragile states, to rogue states, and most disturbingly, to sub-state actors like terrorist groups. The reason I'm outlining these views is that we think we've really served over the last 18 months as a thought leader in this process. Because as we look at the remarks and statements that are contained, for instance, in the President's recent nuclear posture review, where the Obama administration placed the issue of non-proliferation and nuclear terrorism as the key goal of American nuclear strategy looking forward. We're very pleased that we have, in our view, been leaders in leading this country and other countries in re-evaluating the role and place of nuclear weapons. As we look at the new START Treaty, which was, of course, signed just this morning by President Medvedev and President Obama in Prague, I have to say I was delighted to see that the President not only focused on the important steps that are contained in this treaty, but also focused together with President Medvedev on the need for a follow-on negotiation to further reduce those weapons and continuing to endorse the long-term goal of nuclear elimination. And I was also delighted to see that that he and his advisors have embraced the idea that the role of nuclear weapons is changing. And the danger of nuclear weapons today is not of a major nuclear conflict, but the spread of nuclear weapons, the risk of nuclear terrorism, and the need to lock down nuclear materials worldwide, which of course would be the central theme of the Nuclear Security Summit here in Washington next week. So I will conclude by saying we will continue to act as a thought leader in this area. And in the policy realm, we're going to work in the coming year on plans for bringing China, India, Pakistan, the European nuclear powers, Britain and France, and Israel into the arms control process. We see this as a very important necessity. But while we focus on thought leadership, we also need to focus on political leadership. And that means really working hard to develop political support for the global zero concept. Political support in the near term for the new START Treaty to make sure it is ratified. But beyond the new START Treaty, political support for a longer term process of creating a world without nuclear weapons. So with that political and focus on political organization and grassroots organization, I want to turn now to Her Majesty Queen Noor.
Thank you, Rick, for a wonderful summary of the key points that we're trying to emphasize. I look at the historic steps towards zero the last year from the perspective, several perspectives, of my US-based Cold War childhood in the terrifying shadow of the MAD policy, mutually assured destruction, and the past 35 years of my work and my life in the developing world, and as a Muslim, as a mother. The progress that we have seen over the past year, Presidents Obama and in particular, is very encouraging, but we still have so far to go. As a Muslim, I share the moral and spiritual concerns about the genocidal role of nuclear weapons, first expressed by the scientists who created them, and who witnessed their destructive impact. The Quran declares killing an innocent person is tantamount to killing all of mankind. But for me as a global citizen, that horror is compounded by the growing threat of proliferation and of nuclear terrorism today, increasing the odds of what President Kennedy called the risks of accidents, miscalculation, and madness, and the potential for continuing and expanding irrational arms races in regions like the Middle East. Especially now when increasingly poor populations in these regions are facing the consequences of global warming and severe the economic downturn. We are at a nuclear tipping point, beyond which there may be no turning back. And we are witnessing the greatest opportunity in decades to mobilize what international polling has shown is majority support in nuclear and non-nuclear states for zero. If governments don't act now, our governments don't act now to begin to eliminate all nuclear weapons, we will likely witness in our lifetime the destructive use of nuclear technology by a country or by terrorist groups. And for governments to act, global zero needs to become recognized for what it is, an urgent global imperative. It needs to be recognized by the constituencies of all of our governments as that, requiring everyone to get involved. Post-war and post-Cold War generations, I think, are largely unaware of the very real and present danger posed by these weapons. And that is one reason why Countdown to Zero, this film, is so important as a tool for educating generations who haven't felt or been subjected to the terrifying implications of what we're talking about here today. And that is why our efforts to mobilize people of all ages and of all sectors, especially young people, in this movement is I think of great importance. We're not just comprised of hundreds of political and security and faith and other leaders. We include hundreds and thousands of citizens and a growing number of organizations from every country of the world, and we are growing fast. Young people are taking a lead with Global Zero chapters on college campuses worldwide, with more starting every week. And next week, a group of 12 committed young people will launch a road tour traveling this country, organizing community-based screenings of Countdown to Zero, enlisting more people in the Global Zero movement, and building momentum towards the theatrical release of the film on July 9th. And our student leaders, along with partner organizations, including Avaz, Move On, Vote Vets, Physicians for Social Responsibility, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, the New Evangelical Partnership, and others, this week are launching a worldwide drive to collect signatures on the Global Zero petition for the elimination of nuclear weapons, which we will deliver to the leaders of the Nuclear Security Summit. There is still time to change direction and chart our course to zero, but the clock is ticking. President Obama today said the pursuit of peace and cooperation among nations is the work of both leaders and peoples in the 21st century. I urge everyone to sign our petition and join the Global Zero movement at globalzero.org. Thank you, and we now...
Thank you. Valerie.
Good morning. The story of how I became a national figure in the media is widely known, but few people knew what I actually did for the CIA. I was a covert operations officer specializing in nuclear counterproliferation, essentially making sure the bad guys did not get the bomb. My job was to create and run operations that sought to peer into the procurement networks and acquisition chains of rogue nations. I believe that there was no more important work to be done. I resigned from the CIA in 2006 because it was no longer possible to do the covert work for which I was highly trained and which I loved. However, I did not lose my belief that the danger of nuclear terrorism was the most urgent threat we face, nor my passion for working, albeit in a new way, to address that threat. I am proud to be working on this issue now and to be here today as part of the international Global Zero movement. We know that terrorist groups have been trying to buy, build, or steal a bomb. In the last 2 decades, there have been at least 25 instances of nuclear explosive materials being lost or stolen. There is enough highly enriched uranium, HEU, in the world today to build more than 100,000 bombs. Terrorists looking to buy or steal HEU could look to the approximately 40 countries with nuclear weapons materials. And then there are the rogue individuals out there who are running black markets selling nuclear materials and technology. Dr. A.Q. Khan did it for years before my group at the CIA brought him down in December 2003 after catching him red-handed selling a full-scale nuclear bomb to Libya. If terrorists managed to get their hands on enough HEU, they could smuggle it into a target city, build a bomb, and explode it. 100 pounds of highly enriched uranium could fit into a shoebox, and 100,000 shipping containers come into the United States every single day. The only way to eliminate the threat of nuclear weapons terrorism is to lock down all nuclear materials and eliminate all nuclear weapons in all countries. Global Zero. This is why the Nuclear Security Summit, which President Obama is convening next week to galvanize a global effort to secure all loose nuclear materials, is so important, and why all of us at Global Zero strongly support it, and urge all the leaders attending to commit to swift and decisive action to achieve this critical goal. I'm proud to be working with the Global Zero movement and its team of world leaders and grassroots organizers, military commanders, and college kids. I will do everything I can to raise public and political support for the elimination of nuclear weapons. And that is why I said yes when Lawrence Bender asked me to be in an extraordinary and chilling new documentary film called Countdown to Zero, which you will hear a bit more about in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Ricken Patel.
Thanks. Very proud to be here and part of this very exciting and diverse movement with tremendous momentum. My name is Ricken Patel. I'm co-founder and executive director of Avaz, and we're one of the core partners of Global Zero. Avaz is a new global web movement that's just launched in 2007 and has rapidly grown to be the largest global web movement in history. We have about 4.5 million members and growing by about 50,000 people a week. We're in every country and operating in 14 languages. And in just this last few years, we've done 10,000 rallies and flash mobs and events all over the world, raised tens of millions of dollars online, and mobilized millions of people, 18 million actions and counting so far. And part of the reason I mention this is that I think we have a very strong commitment, and we've seen amongst our members all across the world, from Brazil, France, Israel, Iran, India, an agreement and an alignment around this goal of Global Zero. Because our mission is to close the gap between the world we have and the world most people ever want, the world we all dream of. And nuclear weapons is a key part of that gap. These monstrous weapons, this Frankenstein of history, is something that the world's people are aligned around getting rid of. And I think that what Global Zero is doing is moving this agreement from a place of common agreement to shared urgency. And I think we'll see that escalate. I'm very excited about the film coming out soon. Because I think that people are agreed across the world that this system is broken, that it's indefensible, it's unsustainable, and it's unsafe. And there's a lot of attention on particular problems like Iran, but we're looking at dozens more Irans in the future if we don't fix this broken system. So Avaz has already mobilized nationally in certain countries and globally around this objective. And we're going to see over the coming days, I think, a surge of mobilization around this particular objective, the nuclear summit. I think we'll see hundreds of thousands of people mobilizing for Monday, Tuesday, the summit next week. And then in the coming months, we'll see members in individual countries in each part of the world driving the Global Zero agenda forward, organizing around the film, and other objectives in the Global Zero Action Plan. And then I think in the coming years, we'll see the growth of an unstoppable movement to realize the dream of zero. Thanks.
Thank you. Richard Sizek.
Good morning, everyone. In 1980, I came to Washington, D.C. as a newly minted Christian clergyman and a conservative. And it was one of my first actions as a young man to propose an idea that had never been considered, at least by my fellow evangelicals. And it went like this: invite the President of the United States to speak to evangelicals on the morality of nuclear weapons and the Cold War. Mind you, this was early 1983. Well, the proposal went to the White House, and surprisingly enough, I got a phone call back from the speechwriters. They said, come meet with us. I said, I'd be delighted to do so, and we did. And what happened was the following. On March 6, 1983, President Ronald Reagan delivered a blockbuster speech called the Evil Empire Speech to the National Association of Evangelicals. Liberals decried it, conservatives applauded, and a great moral issue developed and followed, a great debate. I was a conservative. I didn't notice in those days one line in that famous speech in which then President Reagan proclaimed, as he later did at Reykjavik and is recounted in the movie, his intention, his wishes to eliminate entirely from the face of the planet nuclear weapons. I didn't hear it because maybe I didn't want to hear it. I changed. Millions of Americans have changed their views as well over these years and now view this threat, especially nuclear terrorism, with a reality and a fear that is rightly placed. And thus, they need to change. I say, if you've never changed your mind about anything, pinch yourself. You may be dead. I don't think anyone here would accuse Lawrence Bender of being a clergyman or a theologian. Isn't that right, Lawrence?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. But I will point this out. Whether intentionally or not, Lawrence Bender and the others associated with this film, an extraordinary film, what they have done is aim at the heart of what theologians describe as the twin tendencies which must be repudiated. The first tendency is to trivialize the nuclear horror, or to become so accustomed to the possibility of it, you see, that we lose our sense of outrage, of indignation at the idea of it all. And the second twin tendency is to become so pessimistic about the future, you see, as to acquiesce to it in helplessness. And so both indifference and pessimism are inappropriate, theologians say. I would say more than inappropriate, they're wrong-headed. They are the sins of omission, if not commission, this indifference and this pessimism. And this extraordinary film, Countdown to Zero, I think goes right at them. Lawrence, did you know that? Maybe not, but you have. On behalf of my fellow faith community, I say, we are together with you in this. Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Sikh, and others all would affirm what T.S. Eliot in 1939 said, quote, the fact that a problem will require the attention of the greatest minds and challenge a generation to solve it is no excuse for postponing addressing it, unquote. I liked one point in the movie. It's slightly humorous, if you'll pardon me for recounting it. But the founder of Global Ground Zero, Roger Molander, was worried, he was told at a meeting at the Pentagon years ago, about getting too excited about nuclear war that would end the world, when in fact he was told only 500 million would die. only 500 million would be killed. I reached for my hat, Molander said, knowing how Woody Allen felt in Annie Hall when he excused himself from a conversation by saying that he had an appointment back on planet Earth. On behalf of all of planet Earth and all of mankind, I say, we have this vision. It's a vision for a world without nuclear weapons. A vision, I say often, without a strategy is a hallucination. Believe me, friends and colleagues, we know we are not hallucinating. This is possible. The strategy is very clear, and we ask you to join us. And we will win this. Some would say, well, for the Gipper. Back to Ronald Reagan, remember? I would say, we'll win it for all of mankind, forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now to talk specifically and briefly, so you can get a chance to ask some questions. I'm going to turn to Jeff Skoll, who in turn is going to introduce Lawrence Bender. Jeff.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. On behalf of Participant Media, I'm delighted to say a few words about our new film, Countdown to Zero. And as a bit of background, I started Participant in 2004 to be a media company focused on social change in the biggest issues in the world. And since that time, we've released 23 films that have been nominated for 17 Academy Awards, including such films as Charlie Wilson's War and the Kite Runner, about Afghanistan, Syriana, about oil dependence, and Good Night, Good Love, about civil liberties and the role of the press. And we've also won Oscars twice for Best Documentary for The Cove this year and for An Inconvenient Truth several years ago. The film, Countdown to Zero, started about 3 years ago when I had returned from a trip to the Middle East, and it seemed that everybody was talking about Iran and nuclear weapons, but the bigger issues of nuclear accidents and nuclear terrorism were largely off the radar. And so much like we had done with climate change, we wanted to do a film about nuclear weapons to get it back on the public agenda. And as it happened, one of my first calls was to Lawrence Bender, who we had worked together on An Inconvenient Truth, and he pointed me to Matt Brown and Bruce Blair of Global Zero, and very quickly we all agreed to do a film together. For Participant, the film is just part of a major public awareness campaign that we're launching in partnership with Global Zero. The campaign will be a coalition of 50 or so organizations, including online partners like Avaz and MySpace, civil society partners like the NRDC and Greenpeace, and many others. And by the end of the year, we expect several million people will see the film, either in theaters or on DVD or on TV with our partner, the History Channel. And it will most certainly be the biggest public awareness campaign about nuclear weapons since the 1980s. And as I'm sure you'll agree, the timing could not be better. So thank you very much for coming here today. And I'll now turn it over to the film's producer, who is neither a clergyman nor a theologian, Lawrence Bender, to say a few words.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll just be brief. The movie's coming out July 9th. Magnolia is releasing the movie. Lucy Walker is the director. It has a kind of extraordinary lineup of people in the movie: President Carter, President Bashar, President Gorbachev, Tony Blair, President de Klerk in South Africa, some great people on this panel, Valerie Plame, Ambassador Richard Burke, and others. I'm working with Participant Media, and as Participant Media has done in all their movies, we're working together to create, just like we did on Inconvenient Truth, a coalition of NGOs, students, faith-based leaders, thought leaders, political leaders, internet gurus. And just like on Inconvenient Truth, there were literally billions of eyeballs on that subject before the movie came out, and that's what we're hoping to do with this movie. To create an awareness, to create the motivation for political will, for the public to engage, and to create change. The movie is terrifying. It's edge of the seat. It's eye-opening. And I think at this point we can introduce the teaser. There's a way to do that. I'm going to show you a 3-minute piece on the movie itself.
there are about 25,000 nuclear weapons in the world.
The B-47 bomber disappeared over the Mediterranean. Nuclear weapons aboard were never located.
6 nuclear warheads hanging from the wing of a B-52 bomber, and the crew didn't know they were there.
Skyhawk strike aircraft carrying a nuclear weapon rolled off an aircraft carrier in the Sea of Japan. The weapon was never recovered.
These weapons could fall into other people's hands.
All the black market seizures that I'm aware of were caught by luck.
At a Russian naval base in the early 1990s, potatoes were guarded better.
We do know various groups have been focused on acquiring weapons of mass destruction, in particular, nuclear weapons.
The risk that you have today with a regime like Iran or North Korea is they are prepared to start trading that nuclear weapons technology.
The objective of Al-Qaeda is to, quote, kill 4 million Americans. You're not going to get to kill 4 million people by hijacking airplanes and crashing them into buildings.
Detectors would have no chance of detecting highly enriched uranium in a cargo container.
The size of a grapefruit could level a city.
Even the well-disciplined, very professional United States military made very serious mistakes with nuclear weapons.
A training tape was slipped into a computer at NORAD.
A single switch prevented a nuclear explosion.
They kill in numbers that the human imagination simply cannot comprehend.
The highly enriched uranium is now within the grasp of any country.
It doesn't take a Manhattan Project to make a bomb.
All of the forces on launch-ready alert could kill over 100 million Russians and Americans within 30 minutes.
I state with conviction America's commitment to seek a world without nuclear weapons.
Would it not be better to do away with them entirely?
The optimum number is none.
None.
I think we'd be better off without them. I say 0.
No nuclear weapons. 0.
0. 0 nuclear weapons.
None. None.
The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us.
Right now, we're talking about Iran. And one of the rationales of people who oppose what you're talking about is Iran, people believe, is trying to develop a nuclear weapon. Why should the United States get rid of its nuclear weapons if Iran is trying to get them? Doesn't it make us extremely vulnerable?
Well, I think the simple answer to that is I don't think any responsible person would say that the United States should unilaterally disarm, go to 0, if a country like Iran possesses nuclear weapons. That's why in a very carefully documented plan that an international commission, the Global Zero, convened over a year ago to produce an action plan for getting to 0, talks about negotiated reductions that begin with the United States and Russia, include other nuclear powers, and in the process, all existing nuclear states move down to 0 in a politically feasible, in a technically verifiable manner. If Iran decides to acquire and deploy a nuclear weapon, then you are likely to see a cascade effect where other countries will think they might have to exercise a nuclear option, including perhaps Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and others in the region. That would be, in my view, and I think in the view of others, that would be a showstopper. But if we are successful in generating, and when I say we, I'm not talking just about global 0, I'm talking about governments like the United States, the Russian Federation, other members of the international community are successful in revitalizing the consensus against the spread of nuclear weapons, you begin to change the decision matrix of the Iranian leadership. Right now, any government in Tehran has to weigh the pros and cons of going nuclear. And if they recognize that the political costs, that there is a going nuclear, that there is an emerging consensus, not only on the part of nuclear powers, but worldwide, and this will be tested next month at the NPT Review Conference. You begin to raise the nuclear threshold for any country, including Iran, for going nuclear. So nobody is advocating unilateral nuclear disarmament. But what we are trying to do is refocus attention to proliferation. One last comment here. Let me remind you that the 1968 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty had embodied in it a trade-off, a deal, a bargain. What it said was that existing non-nuclear countries that signed up to the treaty committed themselves to remaining non-nuclear. But the existing nuclear powers committed themselves to a serious effort in nuclear disarmament. And in past nuclear proliferation review conferences, those non-nuclear countries have justifiably criticized the United States and other nuclear powers for not seriously pursuing their commitments under the treaty. But with the START Treaty, with a follow-on set of negotiations that further reduce U.S. and Russian nuclear warheads, and with a potential multilateral arms control forum where every nuclear state participates, we strengthen, I think, the barriers to further nuclear spread. And that's the logic behind the Global Zero concept. It's also the political logic, I think, behind the Obama administration's efforts to link the new START agreement with its goal of non-proliferation.
I'm Susan Cornwell with Reuters. Ambassador Burt, your statement says that, and I think you said that you're calling for strong commitments to be made by the 47 leaders participating in the Nuclear Security Summit next week. I just wondered if you could be a little more specific. Give us some ideas of some things that you'd like to see them do next week that would be meaningful, and that people couldn't just say, oh, well, that's all just a bunch of talk. No, nothing's going to happen. I'd also love to hear anything more that you want to say about how some kind of multilateral forum could be set up on nukes, the countries that you named earlier. You know, I immediately think, well, gee, would they come? Would they come? Anything more that you want to say about, like, you know, getting China, Israel, Pakistan all in one room talking about this? That would be interesting.
I'll come back to that, but I want to ask Valerie, who's really the expert on the nuclear security summit and the loose nukes issue, to address that.
I'm not the expert on the summit, I'll say that, but what I can speak to is my experience as a CIA covert operations officer, and having looked at the nexus of terrorism and nuclear weapons, it's absolutely terrifying. And I'll just speak for myself personally. As I said in my statement, when I worked for the CIA, I thought this was the most important issue right there, and I still believe that, but I have evolved my position into thinking, you know, the really only way that we can proceed is in fact draining the swamp. Because it is such a different environment. Her Majesty spoke about the Cold War and a childhood of thinking about nuclear explosion. Very different today. That was very much a bipolar world, and it was much more contained. Now, truly the genie is out of the bottle. And when you have the possibility that terrorists, which the film speaks to, stealing a bomb or buying a bomb, that then changes the entire calculus of how to pursue this. And for me, I'm absolutely delighted to be involved with this project because I truly believe, having worked on this in an operational and a field sense, understanding that the only way to finally prevent any accidental or terrorists getting a hold of nuclear weapons is by completely going to zero. It's naive to say, as Ambassador Burt was saying, it would be naive to say that everyone just signs on and believes that this is a good idea. No, it's got to be, it's a process, it's a place to start. You have an objective. It has to be very defined steps to get to that. But we feel so fortunate, everyone here on this panel, this idea first bubbled up, you said 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and here we are on the eve of some incredible momentum from our leadership that we hope that the movie and Global Zero will help accelerate.
Let me just address the issue of moving to a broader negotiation. You know, nuclear proliferation happened because of countries' perceived security concerns. The United States obviously was the first nuclear power. The Cold War was getting underway. The Soviet Union obviously believed that it needed to acquire that capability. Once the United States and Soviet Union acquired that capability, China felt exposed and it needed to go nuclear. China, in my judgment, was probably the major trigger to a serious Indian nuclear program. And now obviously led to the domino effect of Pakistan and so on. You got to reverse that. The way you reverse that is, first of all, for the two leading nuclear powers to demonstrate their support and to be credible to go down to low enough levels so that other countries are enticed into the process. Ironically, one of the things that will lead, in my judgment, the United States and Russia to go to lower levels is the recognition that if they do go far enough in a follow-on negotiation, say down to 1,000 nuclear warheads or so, they have an opportunity to bring, say, China into the process. That's an incentive for Russia to go down lower if it knows it has an opportunity to bring China in. China has incentives to come into the process if it thinks that the Russians will go low enough. Once the Chinese are prepared, and I'm not predicting this is going to happen in a couple of weeks or months, the Chinese take their time in evaluating their options, and they're pretty opaque in this process. But we, in this international commission I referred to earlier that worked on this, we had Chinese participation. The Chinese are beginning to think about this issue. But once the Chinese are prepared psychologically to come to the negotiating table, then I think you have the Indians. Because if you can tell the Indians, who are a newer nuclear power and are worried about the Chinese, that the Chinese are prepared to think seriously about reductions, then I think politically it becomes easier for the Indians to come in. And needless to say, that then opens the door to Pakistan. So that logic, I think, can be reversed. Just as proliferation led to more nuclear powers, I think the process of going down to zero can not only create this barrier that I was talking about before to creating new nuclear powers, but create mutual incentives for existing nuclear countries to lower their weapons in a proportionate way, in a verifiable way, and in a technically feasible way down to very low numbers. Hi, Honor.
Do you have any coordination with the White House on this, or the other anti-proliferation group, which just had a screening of their film, the White House? And then secondly, what are the factors that suddenly have made this issue rise to the surface, at least in the media's consciousness?
Yeah. Well, you know, as you know, as a former member of the media, I can say the media is always kind of late to the party. So I'm not surprised about that. But yeah, there is obviously a lot of overlap here. I mean, it's in a trivial way. The narrator of the film that was shown in the White House was a guest at our so-called Global Zero Summit earlier this year in Paris, Michael Douglas. But that, as I say, is just more of a celebrity factoid. More importantly, I mean, we tell the White House and the Obama administration what to do all the time, like everybody else in this town. But seriously, we try to be thought leaders, and I think we are ahead of the policy-making curve. We're ahead of the bureaucracy. A lot of the concepts that were outlined in the Nuclear Posture Review, a lot of the goals set for both the New START Treaty and we think in the process will be set for the follow-on agreement, we hope and expect and kind of lobby the administration to adopt. So we're kind of participants in the policy process by virtue of being there. That said, I mean, we're not cheerleaders just for Barack Obama. And we're not prepared to criticize the administration when we think they are taking the wrong turn. But I have to say, to answer your basic question of why is this issue kind of been moved up to the front burner? Yes, it's I think because of groups like ours, and also the so-called Gang of Four, Kissinger and George Shultz, who, by the way, George Shultz, my old boss in the State Department, participated in our meeting in Paris. The real reason is Barack Obama, in fact, to be honest about it. I mean, here's a guy who talked about this issue when he's running for president. Having been elected, his first meeting with the president of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, for the first time got a joint U.S.-Russian statement that supported the goal of eliminating all nuclear weapons. They agreed to get back into a new negotiation, and then Barack Obama, in a historic first, chaired a UN Security Council meeting at the United Nations last fall and got endorsement for the Global Zero concept. He has been proactive on the whole issue of nuclear materials lockdown, the summit that you'll see next week. And so, this is an example where one man with a vision can make a difference. But if I can make an analogy here, it's a little bit like, I think, the healthcare debate, in the sense that there are a lot of obstacles here. And one of the biggest obstacles that Barack Obama faces is his own bureaucracy. An entrenched military establishment that has grown accustomed to deploying and using nuclear weapons, even when increasingly we don't deter with nuclear weapons. We are deterred by nuclear weapons. As more and more weak, small countries get them, our national security is going to suffer, not theirs. But it's difficult to kind of turn this super tanker around, and I think we believe that in that sense Barack Obama needs some allies. And on this issue, I think we are prepared to be an ally.
Thank you so much. I'm Diane Perlman. I'm with Huffington Post and also with the Institute of Conflict Analysis and Resolution, and also working with Abolition 2000 on presentations for the NPT.
Did we talk once on the telephone?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Okay, but speaking of obstacles to getting to zero, there are a lot of false beliefs and rationales, like the mantra of deterrence. And I'm actually working with a group of NGOs on a presentation on challenging deterrence theory. And there's also the alternative spiral theory of malignant hostile escalation. And the better alternative is reciprocated initiatives and tension reduction, and we need drastic tension reduction. So there's a need to deal with the underlying conflicts, like for example with Iran, coercive, punitive techniques are likely to provoke defiance, whereas something like a grand bargain, and transforming, it's called second order change, changing the nature of our relationships so that we don't feel have the fear and insecurity that drives a desire, a belief in that. So just there's a lot of sort of mindless acceptance of deterrence as a rationale for maintaining this, and as long as nuclear weapons exist, we need a safe, reliable deterrent. We don't even call them nuclear weapons anymore, we call them nuclear deterrent. So I'm wondering sort of what people think, or if you're addressing dealing with the underlying conflicts.
Well, you can't, I think, try to do everything. And you mentioned several concepts that I've never heard of, but maybe we could talk later and you can explain them to me. I don't think we're taking on the sort of fundamental foundation of deterrence. deterrence, but I think what we're saying is the world has changed. I mean, the Reverend here talked about his change. I'm not in that school. I don't think I have changed. The world has changed. I think there was, and this is just my own personal view, there was a role for nuclear weapons during the Cold War. I mean, we lived in a bipolar system. We were adversaries, and you can make the argument. You may not agree with it, but you make the argument that nuclear weapons were stabilizing during that period, and that we avoided a conflict. You can also make the point that we came at some points, like in the Cuban Missile Crisis, much too close to a conflict. But my view, and I think the view that we endorse in Global Zero, is that world is gone. That the threat has changed. Even my old bureaucratic adversary and friend, Richard Pearl, has said on the record that the likelihood of the United States and Russia going to the war is nil. I can't imagine a situation where we're going to go to full-scale war with Russia or China. That threat has faded away. We face a new range of threats where traditional deterrence theory really doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes, as I was, and in my answer to Eleanor, it makes more sense for weaker states. In the bipolar Cold War era, nuclear weapons made strong powers stronger. In my judgment, in the era we're entering, of terrorism, of failed states, and proliferation, nuclear weapons make weak states stronger, and they undercut our national security as a result. So I think we have to evaluate concepts of deterrence in light of changing international conditions.
Richard, before we, I'd love to get the benefit of General Sheehan's input. It's
Jack?
unique.
I think Ambassador Burt has it right that early in the 40s and 50s that there was a significant role for nuclear weapons from a deterrence standpoint. If you remember the most recent release of the Cuban Missile Crisis debate, the one thing that was the sword of Damocles hanging over President Kennedy was the use of weapons. So in one sense it was a negative, and in another sense it prevented them from making some extremely stupid mistakes. As we evolved through to the point of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the real issue became control of nuclear material, not only from the standpoint of what happens within the country of the Soviet Union, but what happens to the scientists, what happens to the material. And I think that's where Pandora's box opened. And this is why organizations like Global Zero have found traction, because people begin to realize that deterrence as a concept has changed. Could conventional weapons have reached the point of sophistication, they unto themselves have a deterrent capability. The issue I think that we're all going to face over the next 20 years is how do we manage this legacy of material, people, and systems. The issue, for example, in Great Britain today is what happens to the Trident program that Britain has. Very, very expensive. They have a huge budget deficit. Taking one Trident boat offline will not significantly change the balance of the equation. If France lost its strategic capability, what would change in Europe? So I think there are real political issues. I think there are budgetary issues. And I think there's a growing realization that weapons of mass destruction, whether released by a terrorist or released by a Western civilized state, is both immoral and very frankly has lost its utility.
Can I just add something as well? That Global Zero has from the outset actually taken into account exactly what you were referring to before. In terms of our recognition, in terms of political component of our work. And this has come out in our summit meetings as well, the 2 different summits we've had over the last 2 years. The importance of recognizing and addressing regional, national or regional insecurities. And this film, this is an international movement. It's one thing I think it's important to state, because the film is going to be released internationally as well. I hope I'm not speaking after here. It will first be released well, actually, it will be first released internationally at the festival, I guess. But ideally, it is also going to be a resource for mobilizing people in countries around the world, especially in nuclear states. And the political component of our work is one which is recognizing that different states and regions have different sets of historical and current realities that are driving, in many cases, those nuclear weapons programs. But they also, we have a range of opportunities that are provided by economic and other factors, especially growing awareness, that we hope this film and our movement can play a role in mobilizing, that we can use perhaps to achieve our objectives. But absolutely what you mentioned earlier is a component part of what we've been talking about from the outset.
David,
Two more questions.
Protection. Pratap Chatterjee, Interpress Service. So my question actually is about, in the last couple of days, President Obama, and in fact last year, has escalated the war of words with Iran. He talked about the European missile shield. It seems to me films like yours, Lawrence, could actually play a role in convincing people, countries such as Iran, to de-escalate. I know that Lawrence recently went to both India and Pakistan, more success in Pakistan and not as much success in India. Are you going to try and take the film to Iran? And are you, the Halabi family presumably has connections in Syria. Should you take it to the Middle East and take it around there to convince people, instead of being part of this escalation of words between the US media and the US government, is to actually be part of joining hands on the Global Zero campaign?
I'll address the film part, someone else can address the escalation of words. I was just in India, I wasn't in Pakistan actually. We tried to shoot in Pakistan, and it's very difficult to get. It's easier to get in as a journalist or as a tourist, but much harder. So we ended up shooting and filming President Musharraf in London. But I actually was just in India, screened a movie in Mumbai, screened a movie in Delhi. We had a phenomenal group of people there. Part of the Global Zero people that hosted the screening in Delhi was General Air Force Marshal, Chief Air Force Marshal Tyagi. He used to oversee the entire Air Force in India, which primarily oversees the nuclear arsenal, and some other pretty extraordinary people that were in charge of the arsenal. In 1998, they thought that it was in India's national interest to have nuclear weapons, and a dozen years later, they felt that it's now in their national interest to get rid of them, not unilaterally, of course. And it was a terrific place to be. It's my first time in India. But I had, it was just, it's people, most people around the world have no idea, just like when we made the movie about global warming, most people didn't understand that the climate crisis was a serious issue. And then when people saw Al Gore's presentation, it becomes very obvious. And it was the same with this movie in India. And I have commitments from people there. There's 500 million cell phones in India. There's 19 million cell phones sold last month. And one of the people that's involved with this technology around cell phones committed to getting 10 million zero heroes, 10 million people to sign the declaration over the next several months in support of the movie, in support of this whole campaign. So the answer is that, as Queen Nora said, this is an international campaign, and we want all the countries around the world to see it, the Middle East, everywhere. It's important for nuclear states and non-nuclear states, obviously, because this is a global effort.
And we have members of Global Zero. Our founding leaders come from Pakistan, from India, from China, from most nuclear states, and God willing, in the future, all will be represented on Global Zero. And they are hopeful. We've had long, lengthy, you could describe them in better detail than I perhaps, but long, lengthy discussions about all aspects of the challenges that we face. And these are the former architects, in many cases, of the nuclear programs in Europe and Asia and elsewhere, who do believe in zero, or they wouldn't be with us, but also believe that their countries can be brought around to, but so it's going to require a phased, verifiable, and a process with enforcement mechanisms as well. But they do believe it's possible.
You're going to try and take it to Iran and Syria?
I'm willing to go with you.
I would love to.
The short answer, just to add, is that the beauty of film is it goes all over the world. And a little story, a couple of years ago I was in India in a very remote part of the Himalayan foothills, staying in a place where the roads ran out, we were carrying packs, we ended up in a little hostel with no electricity, and one of the kids who was there said, "Oh, An Inconvenient Truth," and he had seen the movie and he had shown it to all his friends, and we hope to get this film into as many places as we possibly can, especially places that need to see it, like Iran and Syria. So,
okay, one more question. Ambassador Burt, David Korn with Mother Jones Magazine and PoliticsDaily.com. The START treaty will lead to somewhat of a political fight in the Senate, and arms control advocates are already worried that Senator John Kyle and some other Republicans will be obstructionist, and they're sort of seem to be positioning themselves at least to make the ratification process hard, if not impossible. And so, what's your message to those Republicans as this whole new front line in Washington begins?
Well, you know, I can say as a former political appointee of 2 Republican administrations, that I think it's going to be very difficult for anybody to come up with a very strong set of coherent arguments against this treaty. The treaty itself, as you know very well, does not take sweeping steps to reduce either the Russian or the U.S. Deployed arsenal. And if you view it in a kind of just as a snapshot, it's a very small step towards further reductions. I think the importance of the treaty is broader in terms of putting the U.S.-Russian arms control process on track again, and it's been off track for nearly a decade. It is important because it could lead then to a much more profound set of agreements following this treaty. But the treaty itself, I think, is going to be, I think in my judgment, will be ratified because I think the administration and the Russian side have not kind of fundamentally changed the structure of the arms control process and the treaty that I helped negotiate in the 1990s. So yeah, there will be some outliers who I think will vote against it, but I am confident that someone with the integrity and credibility of Richard Lugar, the minority leader of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, will bring enough Republicans on board to get it ratified. People will have some special projects, and they'll want, for instance, the nuclear labs and other kind of other special interests taken care of in the context of this treaty, and that's not new to arms control. And so I think people are positioning themselves to engage in that kind of wheeling and dealing. But I think anybody who would vote against this treaty needs to think about the consequences of what would be the signal we would send to the rest of the world if the United States could not ratify this treaty. What would be the impact on proliferation? What would be the impact on the problem of the spread of nuclear materials worldwide? What would it do to the U.S. leadership position around the world on not just nuclear arms control, but a whole range of international order issues? I mean, in my judgment, it's very clear what the consequences would be, and for that reason, I'm even given the kind of dysfunction political situation that exists now in the U.S. Senate, I am still optimistic that it will be ratified.